April 1945. The Third Reich was collapsing from every direction. The Soviets closed in on Berlin from the east, the Allies pressed from the west, and inside Hitler's bunker, desperation ruled every decision. In those chaotic final days, two generals were handed missions that no soldier could realistically accomplish. Walther Wenck was ordered to break through with a patchwork army of exhausted men and barely trained schoolboys and somehow rescue Berlin. At the same time, Hasso von Manteuffel was tasked with holding the Eastern Front along the Oder River against overwhelming Soviet power. Both men knew the truth. Their orders were impossible. Yet the choices they made in those final days would define not only their own lives, but the fates of thousands under their command. Walther Wenck was often called the boy general. Unlike many older commanders, he represented a new style of officer, one who valued planning, analysis, and honest reporting. Rising through the Reichswehr after the First World War, he built his reputation on precise staff work and clear communication. By the early 1940s, he had already served as Chief of Operations for the 1st Panzer Division and earned a reputation for methodical thinking. Wenck wasn't afraid to tell the truth, even when it was unpleasant. In one 1944 report, he described the Eastern Front as like Swiss cheese, full of holes. It was an unusually blunt statement in a system where many tried to flatter Hitler with illusions of strength. While some criticized him for the tone, Hitler oddly respected Wenck's directness, and it showed his commitment to reality rather than wishful thinking. Manteuffel's background was almost the opposite. Born into a Prussian noble family, he embodied the long traditions of German military culture. He had started his career as a cavalry officer, but quickly adapted to the new era of mechanized warfare. By the late 1930s, he had become a respected authority on panzer tactics, even writing instructional manuals on speed and decentralized command. Unlike Wenck's reliance on staff analysis, Manteuffel thrived on the battlefield itself. He had commanded the 7th Panzer Division in 1943, and later led the 5th Panzer Army in 1944, gaining a reputation for tactical boldness and personal leadership. His experience proved that survival in modern war depended on flexibility, quick decision-making, and the courage to improvise. Here, we see the fundamental difference between the two men. Wenck believed in careful preparation and honest evaluation. He was the type of leader who tried to balance strategy with the human cost of decisions. Manteuffel, on the other hand, was a battlefield commander whose instincts leaned toward innovation, adapting to shifting realities even if it meant breaking from doctrine. Both had proven themselves capable leaders, but as Germany neared defeat, their contrasting philosophies would be tested in ways that revealed the true meaning of duty and conscience. The orders given to them in April 1945 were less military strategies and more acts of desperation. Wenck was told to abandon his positions facing the Americans in the west and turn his 12th Army east toward Berlin. The idea was that he would break through the Soviet encirclement, link up with the 9th Army already trapped near Halbe, and somehow rescue the capital. In reality, his forces were a patchwork of officer cadets, Hitler youth teenagers, and fragments of divisions that had been destroyed and rebuilt multiple times. These were men and boys who were expected to face the most battle-hardened Soviet divisions, veterans who had fought their way from Stalingrad to Berlin. The imbalance was staggering. On the Eastern Front, Manteuffel's assignment was equally hopeless. His 3rd Panzer Army had to defend the Oder River north of the Seelow Heights. Standing against him was Zhukov's 1st Belarusian Front, one of the most powerful military forces in history. Manteuffel's army existed mostly on paper. Many of his divisions had been reduced to battalion strength. Supplies were low, replacements were old men or young boys, and communications were breaking down. Against him, the Soviets had tanks, aircraft, artillery, and overwhelming manpower. He knew from the very beginning that the position could not be held indefinitely. Despite these odds, both generals responded first with discipline and professionalism. Wenck began pushing his army eastward from the Elbe, moving away from the Americans and toward Potsdam. His troops advanced almost 30 kilometers before being stopped by the Soviet Fourth Guards Tank Army. For a short moment, it seemed as if his planning might achieve a breakthrough. But when his inexperienced soldiers faced Soviet veterans, the reality became clear. Artillery barrages, tank assaults, and coordinated infantry counterattacks crushed any hope of a direct path to Berlin. Wenck was forced to reassess. It was here that Wenck made the first truly independent decision of his career. Instead of blindly following orders, he shifted his focus. Rather than marching toward Berlin to fight a hopeless battle, he redirected his army toward the Halbe pocket, where tens of thousands of German soldiers and civilians were trapped. His new mission was no longer about saving Hitler or the Reich. It was about saving lives. He told his troops, "It's not about Berlin anymore. It's not about the Reich anymore. It's about the people." That choice, made in defiance of Hitler's command, turned him from just another general into a figure remembered for humanity in the middle of destruction. Meanwhile, on the Oder River, Manteuffel applied his own experience. When the Soviets launched their massive assault on April 16th, the Battle of Seelow Heights began with one of the largest artillery bombardments in history. Many German positions were shattered instantly. Instead of insisting on suicidal last stands, Manteuffel orchestrated a series of fighting withdrawals. His goal was not to hold the ground forever, but to delay the Soviets while keeping his remaining soldiers alive. He had seen the consequences of Hitler's no-retreat orders during the Ardennes campaign. Now he ignored those same kinds of orders to preserve what little remained of his army. Each withdrawal was carefully timed, preventing encirclement while forcing the Soviets to fight for every kilometer. Though the outcome was inevitable, his leadership gave his men a chance to survive. By late April, both generals had reached their breaking points. Wenck's attempt to reach Berlin was over. His men had done all they could, but the Soviet lines were simply too strong. Instead, his 12th Army became the lifeline for refugees and trapped soldiers. They fed more than 250,000 civilians daily while opening escape routes to the west. Wenck himself supervised the crossings of the Elbe River, making sure as many as possible could reach safety before the Soviets closed in. It was a symbolic moment. He was no longer fighting for Hitler, but for humanity. Manteuffel, too, saw the futility of further resistance. His army was shattered, ammunition almost gone, and supplies exhausted. By early May, with the Soviets advancing relentlessly, he made the choice to surrender to the British rather than let his men be annihilated. On May 3, 1945, the Third Panzer Army laid down its arms. For Manteuffel, the war was over. He had chosen preservation over pointless destruction. As April gave way to May 1945, the decisions of Walther Wenck and Hasso von Manteuffel had set the course of their fates. Both men had made choices rooted in their military philosophies, choices that were vastly different, yet shaped by the same harsh reality of Germany's defeat. While Hitler's final days were marked by increasing desperation and delusion, Wenck and Manteuffel made pragmatic decisions that would define their legacies long after the war ended. Wenck's final act as a commander was an act of defiance and humanity. By choosing to redirect his army away from Berlin and into the Halbe pocket, he saved tens of thousands of soldiers and civilians. His actions were a sharp break from the blind obedience that had marked much of Nazi leadership. Instead of leading his troops into an unwinnable battle for Berlin, Wenck turned his focus to survival and escape, a choice that revealed his deep understanding of the value of life over loyalty to a doomed cause. In the days that followed, as Soviet forces closed in on his position, Wenck's strategic mind continued to serve him. He organized the retreat and evacuation of his forces and civilians, carefully navigating through the collapsing front line. When the Elbe was crossed, Wenck was among the last to leave, a symbolic moment of his shift from a soldier obeying orders to a rescuer prioritizing humanity above all else. His decision to disobey Hitler's orders and to take an independent path toward saving lives ended his military career, but earned him respect from the Allied forces. Wenck surrendered to American forces on May 7, 1945, just days before the official German surrender. He would be interned until December 1946. After the war, Wenck faced a very different life from the one he had known in the military. His post-war career was surprisingly low-key. Released from internment, he returned to civilian life, working as managing director of an industrial ovens company, Dr. C. Otto & Comp, and later taking a leadership role at Diehl Group, a manufacturer of arms. His war record earned him respectful mention in Allied after-action reports, though he remained silent about his experiences. Unlike many of his peers, Wenck chose not to dwell on the war in public, keeping a low profile. In 1957, he was offered the position of Inspector General of the newly formed Bundeswehr, the West German Army, but he declined, citing a lack of agreement on the terms of his role. Wenck's death in 1982 in Austria, following a car accident, marked the end of a life that had been shaped by his final, fateful decisions in 1945. Manteuffel, on the other hand, would take a different path after the war. He was interned by the Allies at Island Farm and spent time reflecting on the battles and decisions that had defined his military career. During his internment, he wrote a detailed monograph on the Ardennes offensive for the U.S. Army Historical Division, showcasing his analytical mind and expertise in mechanized warfare. Upon his release in 1946, Manteuffel became involved in German politics, serving in the Bundestag as a representative of the Free Democratic Party from 1953 to 1957. In his new political role, he advocated for the rearmament of West Germany and the creation of the Bundeswehr, understanding the need for Germany to defend itself in the emerging Cold War environment. Manteuffel was also the one who coined the name Bundeswehr for the new German military. However, Manteuffel's post-war political career was marred by controversy. In 1959, he was convicted for the wartime execution of a deserter, although the sentence was later suspended. This case cast a long shadow over his political and military legacy, raising questions about his role in war crimes, even as he tried to rebuild his life and country after the horrors of the war. Despite the controversy, Manteuffel remained an influential figure in the West German military and political landscape until his death in 1978. The contrasting post-war careers of Wenck and Manteuffel offer an interesting lens through which we can view the legacy of two men who, despite their different leadership styles, shared one critical experience: the choice between following impossible orders and acting according to their own conscience in the final days of World War II. Both men made decisions that prioritized the survival of their men over blind obedience to Hitler's commands. In doing so, they earned respect in different ways, but both also paid the price for their disobedience to the Nazi regime. Wenck, the methodical and analytical general, was remembered for his defiance of Hitler and his dedication to saving lives in the face of an impossible situation. His actions in April 1945, his decision to save civilians and retreat rather than fight a doomed battle for Berlin, set him apart from many other Nazi commanders who followed orders without question. Wenck's decision to act in defiance of Hitler's will was not just a military decision, it was a moral one. His legacy became that of a man who put humanity first, even at the cost of his own career. Manteuffel, the battlefield commander, took a different path. His pragmatic decision to retreat from Seelow Heights and later surrender to the British was seen as a necessary evil. Manteuffel's reputation as a commander of armored warfare had been built on quick decisions and a practical understanding of battlefield realities. When faced with overwhelming Soviet forces, he knew that continuing the fight was senseless. His withdrawal was a calculated decision to preserve his remaining forces rather than throw them away in futile resistance. Though his actions saved many lives, Manteuffel post-war career was forever tainted by his wartime decisions and the moral ambiguity of his involvement in war crimes. In the end, both generals faced the collapse of the Third Reich, and both made choices that were rooted in their understanding of duty and leadership. Walther Wenck and Hasso von Manteuffel were two very different men, shaped by different military philosophies, but their final decisions in April 1945 were defined by a single common thread: conscience over blind obedience. Their choices during the final days of the war were not just about military strategy or tactics. They were about legacy. They chose the hard path, one of humanity, pragmatism, and survival, rather than the easier path of sacrificing everything for a lost cause. Their actions are a reminder that in the face of overwhelming odds, sometimes the most important thing a leader can do is to choose the right path, even if it means going against everything they've been taught to believe. And so, as history looks back on these two generals, it does not remember them as heroes of a lost cause, but as men who made difficult choices in the final hours of a collapsing empire. In the end, their decisions defined them not as mere soldiers of war, but as men who chose humanity over ideology and who left behind a legacy that still resonates today.